Hi there. I'm so excited to welcome you to the Arthritis Life podcast, where we share arthritis life stories and tips for thriving with autoimmune arthritis. My name is Cheryl Crow, and I am passionate about helping people navigate real life with arthritis beyond joint pain. I've been living with rheumatoid arthritis for 20 years, and I'm also a mom, occupational therapist, video creator, support group leader, and I created the Room to Thrive self-management program. I am so excited to help you live a more empowered life with arthritis. We're going to cover everything from kitchen life hacks to navigating the healthcare system to coping with friends who just don't get it. Seriously, no topic is going to be off limits on this podcast. My interviewees and I share our honest stories of how chronic illness affects our lives. This includes discussions about mental health, sex, shame, pregnancy, body image, advocacy, self-acceptance, and so much more. You'll hear stories from all ends of the spectrum, from a person who's living in medicated remission from psoriatic arthritis to somebody living with severe mobility restrictions and severe pain from rheumatoid arthritis. You'll hear how people manage their conditions in different ways, like medications, mindfulness, movement, social support, work accommodations, and so much more. You'll also hear from rheumatology experts who just get it. We'll dive deep into the science behind chronic pain and what's the latest evidence for lifestyle changes that can help you thrive with arthritis, including exercise, sleep, nutrition, stress reduction, and more. This is your chance to sit down and chat with a friend who's been there. Ready to figure out how to manage your arthritis life? Let's get started. All right. I'm so excited today to have Stephanie on the Arthritis Life podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yay. Can you just get us started by sharing where do you live and what is your relationship to arthritis?
Yeah, I live in central Massachusetts, and my relationship to arthritis is relatively new. I was just diagnosed in January of this year, so 2024. And so I feel like I've learned a lot, and I also am consistently still very surprised by what I don't know or how this disease is showing up for me. So that's kind of where I am right now.
Yeah, understandable. Well, and this is not your first rodeo, as they say, with chronic or acute illness. I know that you've also been living with endometriosis and then cancer. Can you share a little bit about, your diagnoses for all of your conditions? Did you have an easy experience, hard experience? All of that, the saga, as we often say.
I would say, as far as I've been very privileged and fortunate to have access to good medical care. So, getting to see doctors hasn't been a huge challenge for me. The diagnoses have been the more kind of tricky spot. So it started off with cancer, actually. I had a miscarriage that had a complication. And so already that was kind of pushing me to see specialists when I got pregnant again. And I had a second miscarriage in the fall of 2020 and found out on some kind of follow-up routine labs that it had been a really rare type of pregnancy. It was a genetic abnormality that was just kind of a fluke. And in a very small percentage of cases, those types of pregnancies form a malignant tumor. And so my doctors were like, well, that's very unlikely, but let's just do another ultrasound. We'll do a little bit more lab work. And lo and behold, there was the tumor on the lab work. So the tricky thing about that is that particular type of tumor isn't exactly cancer, but it has a lot of the same features, and the treatment is a type of chemotherapy. And so I had that in the winter of 2020, and it was really hard. It was hard for a number of reasons, but it was a really rare type of tumor. So there really wasn't much community to be found, like online, or, I didn't know anybody who had gone through anything like this. And of course, it was also COVID. So it was just a very kind of isolating experience to have gone through that.
I can only imagine. I'm so sorry, especially with getting pregnant and probably the happiness and excitement about, having a pregnancy and then having it turn into this really difficult situation. I'm so sorry you had to go through that during COVID, especially.
Oh,
So,
thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot. I had good some support, but nobody really kind of it's a mashup of all of these really hard things, and I think it's just hard for folks to kind of relate. Um, so I went through chemotherapy, which was very successful. All my tumor markers went down, but about partway through, um, I had chemotherapy for about 3 or 4 months, and about halfway through that, I started to have a lot of pelvic pain. And there was no medical reason as far as the tumor was concerned that I should be having pain. It was decreasing, everything was like getting lower. So I got bounced back to my gynecologist, who really didn't think, my oncologist thought maybe endometriosis. My gynecologist thought, not so sure. But none of the sort of treatments that I had for the pelvic pain were all that successful or successful consistently. And so, about a year later, my husband and I had decided that we weren't going to continue to pursue parenthood. And my doctor offered me to have a laparoscopy to look around and see if endometriosis was there, and also to tie my tubes. Um, and at the same time, it was sort of this kismet. The gynecologist that I had originally been hoping to see, who had been out on maternity leave, came back. And she said, your uterus has been through a lot. It's had a lot of trauma. It's probably related to the pelvic pain. If you're not going to be pursuing pregnancy, it might be better just to do a full hysterectomy. So in the winter of the following year, I had that done, and there was a lot of endometriosis, quite a bit. And looking back now, I think I did have earlier symptoms, that always was just, I didn't really complain about them that much. I was sort of under the impression that like this is just normal variation of, having a uterus and a body. But um, there was a lot of endometriosis. The other thing was that there was still cancer in my uterus. So it was actually really, really important that I had that hysterectomy. They sent that tissue out for additional testing, and that came back as the rarest rare type of gestational tumor. And there's really, so definitely cancer. And it's resistant to chemotherapy. So it makes sense that it hadn't fully been gone as a result of the medication that I had. And so now for that, I just have follow-ups. I have regular PET scans and lab work that I do, and that will be watched for a while. But it's such a rare condition that there aren't any guidelines for follow-up. So my doctors are kind of winging it and erring on the side of being conservative and careful, which I appreciate. Um, when I had the hysterectomy, they did take out the endometriosis that they could. And since then, I've continued to have kind of on and off pelvic pain. I do think it had a beneficial impact on my symptoms, but not, it hasn't fully resolved them.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. That sounds awful. And just quick definition moment. Do you mind telling the audience, for people who might not know, what is endometriosis?
I will do my best. I have to tell you that RA has sort of taken over my
Oh yeah.
medical lexicon. But endometriosis is when tissue that is similar but not the same as the
Yes.
tissue of the uterine lining grows in other places. And it can happen anywhere in the body. It's not, it's often, you might find it in the bowels, but it can be all the way up in the chest cavity, kind of all over. And it just wreaks havoc. This
Mhm.
tissue cycles similarly to endometrial tissue, so it can fluctuate with your cycle. And the way, I don't know if this is like medically accurate or not, but the way that I think of it is it just like it just kind of makes a mess and sticks things together. It starts to attach to all kinds of different organs and parts of your body. And so it can really cause quite a lot of problems and be really, really serious for people who have been diagnosed with it.
Yeah, thank you. No, that was what I was going to
Is that
say
it?
too.
Okay.
I pulled up the WHO definition just because it's something I kept hearing about over time. And I was like, I know it has something to do with the uterus and something to do with, you know, stuff growing where it's not supposed to. But I was like, for a long time until I didn't know it was so common until I started being more active in the chronic illness community. I think I know the main point for today is sharing your rheumatoid arthritis story, but also it's important, I think it's good to share the rest of your health journey because these conditions aren't always your first experience with navigating the healthcare system and everything exists. I think of that Kamala Harris comment, you exist in the context in that of that which you live and all that came before you. It's like everything's in context. So,
Hmm.
and I'm, to anyone listening who's had to make such difficult decisions about, whether or not to try to pursue pregnancy or have a hysterectomy or all that, I'm really sending my love out to anyone who's been through anything similar and to you, obviously to you as well, because that sounds all just hard. It's
Yeah.
just hard. Yeah. And then how did, what did you start feeling in terms of the rheumatoid arthritis symptoms? If you have ever felt completely lost or utterly alone while trying to navigate real life with rheumatic disease, listen up. I am here for you. I created an educational program to help you go from overwhelmed to confident, supported, and connected in a matter of weeks. And it's called Room to Thrive. After earning a master's in occupational therapy and completing hundreds of hours of additional training, I created a step-by-step guide to help you truly thrive with rheumatic disease. This is the only program I know of that's designed to improve quality of life for people living with inflammatory, autoimmune forms of arthritis, like rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis, Sjogren's disease, and more. During the self-paced lessons, you'll learn how to manage pain and fatigue, cope with stress, navigate relationships, and continue doing the things that matter to you and bring you joy. The goal is really to help you improve your quality of life and learn how to thrive with your rheumatic disease right now, rather than waiting for a distant day when it might be cured or healed. I really created the down-to-earth, practical, heartfelt resource I wish I had had when I was first diagnosed at age 20. If you want even more in-depth support, you can join the 12-week Room to Thrive virtual support group, where you'll be surrounded by people who actually get what you're going through, people who will provide the encouragement, validation, and support that you deserve. Each group is expertly moderated, so you don't have to worry about the kind of misinformation that spreads like wildfire in the free-for-all social media groups. If you're on the fence, don't just take my word for it. Here's what Katie had to say in March 2023. I was lost and overwhelmed with my RA diagnosis. It felt overwhelming to know what to read, what to do, how to spend my energy trying to research on the internet. Room to Thrive did that for me. It's been like getting a crash course in my diagnosis along with a community who gets it. To see all the details, including the dates for the next support groups, go to the link in the show notes or bit.ly/thrive room with a capital T and capital R. You can also just email me anytime at info@myarthritislife.net. And don't delay if you're interested, because each group is capped at 16 people or less in order to make a small, intimate group atmosphere. Thanks so much for your time, and I can't wait to get started with the next groups. And I can't wait for those of you who are interested in the self-paced option to go ahead and join that at any time. Bye-bye for now.
Yeah, well, that was kind of a slow burn. So I got this nodule on one of my fingers, and I had broken that finger a little further down on my hand the year before. So I just sort of thought like, well, that's kind of weird. This bump showed up, but maybe it has something to do with that I broke that part of my hand previously. And so I didn't really think much of that. And then maybe a few months later, I noticed that my ring finger was swelling a lot, and I couldn't get my ring over it consistently. And I honestly, I was like, maybe I've just gained some weight. But like in your knuckle, like
Yeah.
it's infuriating that that is where the brain goes. But
Well, you're trying to
anyways,
make sense of it. We all try. I mean,
yeah.
I thought I had sprained my finger and just not remembered how I did it, you know?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
You're like, this is strange, but maybe this.
yeah, your mind jumps to the most simple explanation. Yeah.
hmm And I probably wouldn't have done anything about it at all because I wasn't having any other symptoms at that time. But I happened to go in and see my gynecologist for a follow-up for my endo. And she asked, do you have any new symptoms? And I was like, well, actually, this isn't your area, but I'm having this swelling in my hands. And her face just dropped. And she held my hands and looked at them and she was like, does anyone in your family have rheumatoid arthritis? And I like broke out into a sweat. I was like, I no, no, no one in my family has RA. And that was her concern. So she referred me to rheumatology in the hospital system I was being seen in, but they didn't have any appointments. This was early December of 2023, and they didn't have appointments till April of 2024. And I was like, I can't just sit on this. Like, I'm gonna lose my mind Googling everything about it. So I was able to see a rheumatologist in a different hospital system in January. Um, and he diagnosed me with seronegative RA and put me on Plaquenil to start. And his sort of my labs did not show anything really out of the ordinary. Some of the inflammatory markers were a little high, but that was pretty much it. And so he was sort of thinking like this might just be an episodic thing that's going to come and go, and maybe this is not the actual thing, but we'll start there. Um, I had some concerns about his ability to integrate my care with my other conditions, and so I'm also I like to know things. It helps me to have as much knowledge as possible. And so I decided to get a second opinion. I kept the appointment that I had in April with the original rheumatologist, and I went and saw another doctor, and she agreed with the diagnosis. I felt more confident that she could integrate my care, but she was really dismissive of my symptoms. And at that point, my symptom, like I joint pain in my knees, my elbows, my feet. Like it all just came along pretty quickly after in the winter of that year. So I really was struggling. I felt like I was struggling, and she was saying, like, well, your symptoms aren't that bad. So we'll just keep you on the Plaquenil. And I was like, not that bad for who? Like, this is
Yeah.
bad for me. I'm not functioning very well.
I'm
Um,
so sorry. Oh, and why don't we just very quickly deviate to say, tell the audience, what is it that you do for a living?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I work with dogs. I'm a dog behaviorist,
Yeah.
and I work with dogs that tend to have challenges. So, dogs that might have separation anxiety or aggression or reactivity, guarding, all that kind of stuff. So, although I work with I can do a lot remotely. Yay, technology. I
Mhm.
do go out and see clients in person and see dogs and that I also work as an adjunct faculty at a university here, but that part of my work is pretty physical and demanding, especially in
Yeah.
cold times of the year. Um,
Yeah, yeah, that was my thought too. It's like you the determination of how serious the arthritis is dependent on the person's demands of their daily life, like
mhm,
and whether or not maybe she's feeling these objective quote unquote, measures like the degree of
mhm.
swelling and stuff like that doesn't, even if that's not as high, if it's affecting your life, that's still a huge concern, So
Yeah.
anyway, that's not one of my little soapboxes. So, but that's, I
Yeah.
think it's important for people to understand. That's why it's a horrible feeling to feel dismissed by a health professional.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry I went through that. Okay, continue.
Thank you. Well, I was just going to say I had sought second opinions for other some of my other issues and had equally upsetting doctors. So this wasn't the first go around with this, but I was pretty upset. Um, I felt like my experiences were being diminished, or maybe compared to people who did have, a pretty severe impact of their condition. Um, so I sort of took from that, okay, well, at least now two rheumatologists have agreed on this diagnosis. So I'm feeling pretty confident that RA is what I'm dealing with, but I just now need to find the right provider. And in the Boston area, we have a lot of providers. So I asked around. I had a few people I knew who had rheumatic diseases, and one good friend referred me to her rheumatologist. So I went and got a third opinion. And this doctor was fantastic. She really took her time with me. She looked at all of my joints, which the other doctors had not. She had me demonstrate the type of movements I do in my work. So how I would sit on the ground with the dog, and can I get up without using my hands, and all kinds of things like that, that was just, I was really blown away by how much more thorough it was, and how much she listened. And makes me both really grateful and also really sad that that stood out, that was sort of such an impactful thing. So I was like, okay, I've got my provider. This is great. Um, what I was not prepared for was a sort of a collaborative approach to treatment options, because everything that I had had up to this point, there were either limited options, or it was like a rare thing and nobody knew what to do. So they're like, this is the thing you do. And so I was not prepared to be asked, like, what med do you think, here's some options. What do you want to start with? I was like, I don't know, like, you pick. It doesn't matter to me. So that was a little bit different, but also around that, kind of as all this was happening and I was having all these appointments, I found the Room to Thrive group.
Oh, yes.
And I was, with endometriosis is pretty common, but not a lot in the grand scheme of things is known about it, kind of how it happens and what causes it. And my other, cancer was, there's like 3 papers on it, and that's it. So I spent a lot of time for those conditions, like I'm a nerd, so I found the research and read what I could and tried to understand. And by the time that I got to RA, I was just like, I cannot, like, and also there's a lot more about RA out there than those other conditions. So I felt really overwhelmed with wanting to make sure I was getting the best care that I could, and knowing what that should be, and also just how to live, because most of my doctors were like, here are the meds, but didn't have a lot to say about, like, well, what do I do when my hands are, stiff and cold and I've got to be out there walking dogs, or, what do I do for my knees, and what do I do for brain fog? I could talk all day about that because that's my most current annoying symptom. But I just was I felt paralyzed. Like this was all just too much in a, 3 to 4 year span. And what a relief it was to find the support group and all of the information you provide, because I really feel like it was made for me, honestly. I was just like, it's evidence-based, and it's addressing all of these areas of my life. And I just, and other people kind of going through it. So, that was really a godsend, I think, as I was going through this process. And I felt really lucky that I had access to all of this support when I really needed it.
Yeah, well, and yeah, you're clearly a very thorough person. I
Mhm.
really, I think this is a testament to, the fact that you have a good team around you now is testament to all your work, to getting those second opinions and such. And yeah, I mean, I'm really happy to hear your experience with the Room to Thrive program, because that's exactly why I developed it. It's your doctors are extremely helpful for helping you get the foundation of the treatment for most people with rheumatoid arthritis. The base layer of like your pyramid of treatment is the medications, because they're so
Mhm.
effective, but there are many of them. Every year there's more to choose from. So even that conversation is big, in terms of which ones to start with. And should we add 2, or should we add 3, or should we stay on 2 but change number 1 to a different one? That's the whole
Mhm.
thing. And then, but you're right that, they not only do they not have time in their 15-minute appointment to help you navigate regular life with RA, they actually aren't necessarily trained in that to the same degree as like an occupational therapist. They're just kind of apples and oranges skill sets,
Mhm.
like we are trained to, be able to help people understand how to protect your joints during daily activities like caring for pets. That's a
Mhm.
huge one. It's also a big tripping hazard, depending on how tall your dogs are. Um,
Mhm.
and how to understand what are the tools at your disposal if you're experiencing symptoms, beyond the medications. As medications typically aren't fast acting. So yeah, what can you do if your
Mhm.
hands are stiff? So anyway, that's why I was blown away when I was first kind of developing my own program. I was like, well, let me look at other similar programs and see like where can I like improve upon, don't recreate the wheel, improve upon what's already done. And I'm like, wait, no one's doing this. Like I
Mhm.
couldn't find a single program that was specific to it's called self-management in the OT world or in the healthcare world, public health. It's, they're doing it for like generic chronic illness self-management programs. There are, and I don't say
Mhm.
generic as like a pejorative. Like they are for, there are things that are the same, whether you're coping with diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, other
Mhm.
chronic heart disease, chronic conditions. There are evidence-based programs out there for that general, but they're not as in depth. Like they're meant to be at like a sixth or seventh grade level, whereas mine, I mean, for better or for worse, this is not best practice, but it's at more like a college level of
Mhm.
scientific basis. So anyway, yeah, I'm glad you found it because that's one thing I'm still learning about, like search engine optimization, like how people can find it. But it sounded like the two things that you kind of needed were like just the like logic part of your brain, like how do I cope with this, and then like the emotional part with the support group.
Mhm.
Um, is there anything else you want to share about the group? Sorry, I'm feeling brain foggy right now as well.
That's okay.
Yeah.
No, the group has been wonderful. I will say that my husband has ulcerative colitis and has
Right.
for a few decades now, and he has been fantastic. And honestly, I have felt like, oh, I get it now. Like all the things that he's sort of been through. So he was a really fantastic support. But some things are different, like you said. And so, in terms of the support group, I think I encountered it when I was still going through diagnosis and figuring out treatment options. And so it was really helpful to get a sense of like what medications other people had tried, like what kind of came up first, um, and what kind of process it was for them in terms of waiting for things to work. And I think that everything, I feel like even if it's not relevant right now, it still gets in there. So like this fall, I started, or the late summer, I started Remicade, and I like knew from hearing from people in the group that this was not going to like instantly work. And yet the process of it not instantly working sucked. It was so
Yes.
awful, but it
Yeah.
was nice at least to remember like this is not forever. This, there will come a time when we know if it's working or not and can make a change or keep going. And a lot of that I think was from the group kind of getting through some of those really tough um, times in terms of like the medication transitions. And also just, I have wonderful, wonderful supportive friends. And I have been through a lot of medical stuff. So I felt like, okay, everybody's like gone through this with me before. So like surely nobody's going to say the wrong thing or not really support me in the way that I need right now. And for the most part with my close friends, that didn't happen. But you don't look sick. And all the other things came up for me one by one. And so it was really nice to hear from the group about how they managed that, kind of how they got through it, when they said something, when they didn't say something. And just I think there's something really heartening or supportive, I guess, of being around a group of people who like get it and they've been there.
That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us, people who have these chronic conditions, will even say things like, oh, well, everyone like knows what to do if someone has cancer, or there's like a social script for that. I know it's not that, and then they'll say, well, it's not the same for invisible illness or chronic illness. I know it's not that simple because people still don't know what to say to someone with cancer,
Mhm.
but I remember now tell me if I'm wrong, that you saying something about like that it was surprisingly difficult to cope with rheumatoid arthritis versus cancer, right?
For me, it definitely was. I think mostly because my cancer treatment was relatively non-invasive. I had to go to the hospital often, but I was outpatient, so I was in and out. And it was COVID, so I wasn't really missing anything. Nobody was doing anything at that time.
Right.
Nothing was happening. So it was mostly just kind of me and my thoughts at working from home.
Hmm.
I was employed full time at a university then and had some nice benefits, so I didn't have to work through all of my treatment. But that felt like a very acute thing, and I think because endometriosis was sort of shoved in around the same time, like I sort of figured out what at least right now, and it has been fairly consistent, what endo was going to be like for me and how I was going to manage it. I was like, okay, like I'm going to have pelvic pain sometimes, and that will be that, and I can do X, Y, or Z things, and if I need more help, this is what I do. But RA, and so I guess maybe my endometriosis just got to like we're at the end of cancer stuff. I'm just being monitored. There's nothing to do for that. Endometriosis, I've got it under control. You can control is a theme for me, I think. I've got it
Yeah.
under control. I know what to expect with it at this stage. But for me, RA was like I felt like I was waking up in a new body every day.
Right.
The inconsistency I think was and has been, it like continues to be really challenging for me because I can do the same thing on two different days, and on one day it's fine, and on the other day it's not. I feel like I only exist well in a very small range of temperatures now that I've gone a full calendar year with RA. Like, too hot is too hot, and now it's cold again, and it's way too cold. But there's like a very
Yes.
small 10-degree window in
Yes.
there where everything is fine. Um, so
Mhm.
it feels like a moving target. And, like just in the end of the summer when I felt like, okay, I know what my joint pain feels like. I know what my fatigue has been at its worst. Like, I think I'm getting a handle on this. Like, brain fog, like I've never experienced before, like really threw me for a loop this fall. I just, I felt like I was not functioning well. I wasn't like keeping up with, the things that I usually do. And like I was losing my car in the parking lot at the hospital all the time. And, um, it that I think I had this idea. I didn't really realize that that was going to be such a significant symptom. And so I was sort of like, okay, this is another physical illness. Not that brain fog isn't physical, but to me, I had
Yeah.
sort of separated them.
Hmm.
And so I was like, I am understanding what RA is in my body now. I'm not doing that great at accepting it, but I'm working on it. And then to have this, I sort of thought like, okay, well, my body's gonna be a mess, but my mind will work. And then when that stopped happening in the way that I was used to it happening, I feel like I just fell apart. I like canceled everything that happened after 7 p.m. in the evening, which is a lot for me. I usually do schedule my evenings pretty intensely. And I canceled a lot of commit, I just can't keep up at the pace of that I used to do things. And I think to that, all of that being said, I just feel like my life has been impacted in a much, much bigger way, in a way that is not going to stop and is
Mm.
just going to keep going. Um, in a way that's hard for me. Endometriosis like is not fun and for me, but it's manageable. I can still mostly do all the things that I want to do, and it hasn't impacted my life in a huge way. And cancer, like I said, is kind of on the back burner right now. So um, I think that's why it has felt like a much bigger deal to me than the things that I've been through already, because it has
Mhm.
just touched every part of my life in very significant ways.
Yeah. And I know, you're being careful to say, in your experience, right? Like this is your
Yes.
story of your experience. We're not saying that cancer is a cakewalk and endometriosis is a
Oh
cakewalk and
no.
rheumatoid
I
arthritis,
know
right?
it's
There's vice versa examples all over the place. There's people who start one medication for RA, it puts the disease swiftly into remission and they have no impacts for 10 years, and
mhm.
that's their story. So we're definitely not saying, I think I might have worded that question problematically, but I was just trying to share that it's something that most people at face value would just assume. Cancer is always like the worst possible thing you could ever have. And
Mhm.
rheumatoid arthritis sounds like this kind of mild inconvenience because it has the word arthritis in it. No one knows what rheumatoid means. So part of the
Mhm.
goal of this podcast is breaking down those kind of not stigmas, but those incorrect assumptions people would have. So
Mhm.
I think your story is illustrative of that. And
Yeah.
I'm, to follow up on brain fog, which is also sometimes called, dysexecutive functioning or cognitive dysfunction or neuroinflammation. It is something that I'm actually, the last time I updated the Room to Thrive self-paced course, which is like the core curriculum for the program, which you can always do by itself or you can do it in conjunction with the support group. I updated it in early 2023, and I'm going to update it already again in 2025
Mhm.
because I really well, there's first a couple of things, like amazingly, certain links are already out of date, but also I
Oh my
want to
gosh.
be, yeah, I know, isn't that? Um, but
Goes so
just
fast.
links, like the information is not necessarily out of date, just the links. There's also
Mhm.
been some more really great resources that have come out, like the
Mm.
2024 or 2023 guidelines for fatigue from the European League Against Rheumatism. Those weren't out when I made the course yet. They came out later that year. So things like that. And I kind of am keeping a running tally of what I want to add. And I want to add a bigger focus on brain fog in the
Mhm.
tools for pain and fatigue section. I'm going to be like tools for pain and fatigue, etc. Like, and then add brain fog.
Yeah.
I mean, for better or for worse, it's a lot of the tools for fatigue are the same as the tools for brain fog in terms of the remedial strategies, things like improving your sleep, exercising, lifestyle variables that can help improve your fatigue and brain fog levels. But brain fog is the least understood aspect of these
Mhm.
conditions. It's unclear why sometimes the medications work so well on all of your symptoms, and other times they work really well for the joint pain, but not the brain fog and fatigue.
Mhm.
What does brain fog, we can just keep calling it that. What does it feel like to how does it show up? You mentioned like losing your car in the parking
Mhm.
lot. What are some other examples, if you don't mind?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. I will say that I started calling it cognitive dysfunction because I was getting a lot of like, oh yes, I also have brain fog because I stayed up too late. And I was like, no, no.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I get it, but I'm talking about something that's been a lot more pervasive. Um, I think ways that it has come up, what most scared me when it first started happening was I was forgetting conversations that I had had. So someone would say to me, like, we talked about that like a half hour ago, or, we definitely, like, I asked you that already, or, those sorts of things that was, that was alarming to me because like I don't claim to remember things very well. But something that had just happened, seemed a little unusual. Um, I'd walk into a room and forget what I was there for, but like much more frequently than would had ever happened to me before. Um, I would get confused when I was asked questions and like be a lot more rambly in my like discussions of things. I felt like I wasn't maintaining the thread. And actually, I noticed this recently. So I'm in this lovely a group of dog trainers, and we give each other feedback sometimes on our coaching skills. And so we have to submit little videos of ourselves coaching a client, and then everybody gives feedback, and it's very lovely and helpful. And I've been doing this for a little while now, and so it was my turn to submit my video again, and I was looking through client videos to see what I wanted to submit, and I was really struck by how many more ums and ands and pauses and like thinking through things as I was saying them, but then going back. Like it was not sort of the fluency of coaching that I consider that I do and that I have seen myself do from these other video samples. So um, that was sort of jarring. And I appreciated that you said, I think in the last support group meeting when I was being upset about this, like my like 75% or 80% is still probably quite good. Like I don't think I was doing a poor job, but this is just not the the way I'm used to functioning. And I haven't lost any clients from this. It's probably not as big a deal as it feels like to me. Um, but those are the sorts of things that have come up. And for me, because I love data and I love keeping track of things, I kept a really thorough symptom log that I brought to my rheumatologist maybe a month ago now to talk about brain fog. And she had said what you just said, which was fatigue is often related and how well am I sleeping? And so we're exploring sleep. Unfortunately, I'm not sleeping that well. I used to sleep very well. And she said, well, how much caffeine are you taking in? And I was like, I'm fine. I have no problems. Nope, I'm good. We don't need to alter my caffeine intake. But of
Yeah.
course we have.
Oh,
Um, I don't think it's making an appreciable difference, but you know,
yeah. It helps to have,
exploring.
yeah, it help. I think if you're a very analytical person, which you are, it one of the worst feelings is feeling like there's nothing to be done. So at least knowing that there
Mhm.
are some little levers that you can pull on. Okay, can we improve sleep by decreasing caffeine or adding something like, this is not endorsing anything, but I know a lot of people in the groups have brought up, CBN, not CBD, but
Mm.
CBN gummies. Like so, there's certain kind of cannabinoids that can help people fall asleep or melatonin. There's so many little things that can be done. And I'm going to put in the show notes, which are always on the Arthritis Life website. I'm going to put a link to a resource document that Eileen Davidson made and I contributed to that was in that was made for our It's Not Just Joint Pain presentation at the Rheumatology Conference in 2024, because we
Mm.
put together like a lot of citations for different peer-reviewed randomized controlled trial, journal articles on each of these non-joint or extra-articular symptoms,
Mhm.
fatigue, brain fog / cognitive dysfunction. And so it's for anyone who's skeptical, because a lot of doctors, and I've heard rheumatologists say this, oh, well, if it's really that severe, it's probably not just from the RA, it's probably from something else, which that's
Mm.
always a possibility that there's something else going on, right? There could be,
Yeah.
yeah, to a hammer, everything's a nail. Not everything that you're
Mm.
experiencing if is potentially just rheumatoid arthritis, but there are many, many randomized controlled trials where they'll show that the people with, well, you can't randomize people to have rheumatoid arthritis, but they'll show that people with rheumatoid arthritis do experience cognitive dysfunction at a higher rate than the general population. And then they had subjected people in a couple of these studies to like um, different conditions. So the randomized control trials would be for like exercise. One had an
Mhm.
exercise intervention, the other group didn't. The people who did the exercise intervention showed better sleep quality and better cognitive performance. So that's kind of like doing these kind of studies shows that there is some relationship between all these. It's just, um,
Right.
yeah, knowing for your body what's going to move the lever.
Mhm.
And for me, it can get even more complicated. Again, this you and I are both analytical, right? So I'm also thinking like
Mhm.
my word finding goes really fast, and my
Mhm.
short-term memory deteriorates very rapidly with sleep deprivation.
Mhm.
Like I will forget what I was going to say and stuff, but there's also like when I'm stressed, I also know stress affects my cognitive function, and it doesn't show up in terms of working memory and brain fog, but it comes up more for like sustained attention. Like if I'm stressed, I have a hard time
Mm.
focusing on something. So it's also like there's even all these different components, right?
Yes.
And there's like
Mhm.
generative stuff like writing and creating things versus like taking in information and making sense of it. These are all different cognitive functions. So it's just
Mhm.
no wonder we're overwhelmed sometimes. There's so many different components to it. Um,
Right.
But I hope anyone listening who has, I always try to remember that some people listening might just have just gotten diagnosed or don't even know if they have it yet. But it's helpful knowing from the beginning that this could be, I mean, it's scary, but helpful,
Mhm.
I think, that this might be related to your RA, because I did not know for many years that cognitive symptoms could be related to RA. I thought they were just totally different
Well,
phenomena.
and it was great that week that we talked about it in the group because everybody had something to say about it.
Yeah.
It was very clear to me, like, okay, this is a thing. And that, I don't wish that for all of us, but it feels better to know, like, okay, this is a thing I can expect to happen, and here are the things that I can do
Hmm.
because control.
Yeah, yes, and just to add to that, like we had the initial Room to Thrive cohort-based program that you took, and
Hmm.
then there's also an additional alumni group, or we call it the Thrive Graduates, and that's a
Hmm.
group that continues meeting week after week. And it changes over time because, certain people come in, they come out from the initial cohort. The initial one, you stay
Hmm.
with the same group of, 8 to 10 people, and then the graduates group is, we get up to 20 people in the meeting sometimes. And I will say it's such a common phenomenon in either of the groups, the alumni or the newbies. I call them the newbies, or the regular, the initial Room to Thrive cohort. It's a common experience. People will say, well, this is probably a weird, or no one else probably has this, but, and they'll say what the thing is, and everyone's like, oh no, I have that too.
There we
So
go.
that's a great thing about being in a group setting, is realizing it's very rare that you're the only one. I mean, there are a couple of times when people have had things like, actually, honestly, the one that comes to mind is like a really inappropriate thing that happened to them with their provider being inappropriate to them, and they're
Oh,
like, is this
goodness.
normal? And we were all like, no, this
No.
is not. So it's also good to have that, group to bounce things off of.
Hmm.
And another thing that comes up a lot in our groups, that I didn't like structure them this way when I started it in 2020, but is this whole idea of like discussing ableism and exploring like our identities, and
Hmm.
how, um realizing that you might have, your own internalized ableism, or ableism is prejudice against people with disabilities or health
Hmm.
conditions. And I know that was something you said that you wanted to maybe explore a little bit today, or share. Like, how has your journey been with your identity and confronting ableism?
I think that I wanted to bring it up because it was just even now I think it's hard for me to consider myself as someone with a disability or a disabled person. And but I should preface this by saying that in some of my work with dog training, I work with a really lovely organization that helps people train their own service dogs. And I got accepted into this program in the fall of 2023. And our first session that we had, it was like a self-paced online course. And then we had a bunch of workshops to kind of get certified to work with their teams and help people train their dogs. And the very first workshop was the day after I got my diagnosis. And I mean, they were wonderful. It was I can't speak highly enough about this group, but um, we spent the whole, it was like an 8-hour online workshop day talking about, like, what is disability to you, and how does ableism show up? And I had joined this program thinking that I was going to be learning about this so that I could best serve and work with disabled people and people who have illnesses and a need for a service dog. And I just couldn't help but sit there and be like, oh, I fall into that now. And it just changed sort of the whole experience of it for me. And more recently, another tool aside from the Room to Thrive group that has been helpful has been one-on-one therapy. And I was talking with my therapist about someone who was not really supporting me in the way that I wished would happen. And she asked me, like, do you think this person, like, understands that you're disabled? And I had sort of tucked that away. And I was like, I don't even know if I think of myself that way. So I just can't, I felt like I couldn't blame this person for not, but, I don't really have any answers. It's just been something that's been kind of in the back of my mind as I've been learning more and as I've been impacted in different ways. Um, that that yeah, this is a disability. And so what does it mean for how I go about my own life and my own experiences and the people, that I'll be supporting through this program. And even like my husband, who, has had this chronic illness for a really long time. It's pushed me to want to explore that more and to learn that more because I'm certain that there is internalized ableism everywhere,
Yeah.
that that I need to work on.
Well, yeah, and I so feel similar to you in terms of like it's a process. It's an ongoing process. And I think there are many different ways to draw a line in the sand between what you consider able-bodied and then disabled, but really it's such a spectrum, right? I'm much
Mhm.
more able-bodied than many people, and I'm much more disabled than many people. We're in kind of that quote unquote messy middle, right? And
Mhm.
there's ways, you can that so it's often in occupational therapy school, I remember them one of the teachers defining, something is considered a disability if it substantially impairs your ability to function in your daily life. And I could say that there definitely have been years at a time where rheumatoid arthritis didn't substantially impair me, and there are years and months and days that it certainly did. So how do you
Mhm.
people like I don't want to say us, but since I know you, I can say people like us
Yeah.
who have a hard time with who want to have control and want the world to make sense and want to be able to put things in categories and boxes and you know um
Mhm.
like that is a really like how do you cope with that? You said earlier inconsistency or unpredictability of how do you wrap your mind around an identity if that whole identity is going to fluctuate, you know?
Mhm.
So,
Yes.
and it's hard and it's almost, like I've used the example before, although the science is changing on this. I've used the example of like spinal cord injuries. There's like if you have a complete spinal cord injury, at the time I was trained in 2012, it was like a complete injury is you're going to be paralyzed below that level. So it's like
Mhm.
there's no ambiguity. Like you are not gonna be able to walk. Like and in a way, like in that case, there are studies that show that people who become paralyzed, you would think it is something that the whole rest of their life, it is a grieving thing. It's something that's really, really hard. But interestingly, they sort of do studies of people who've been paralyzed and people who are lottery winners, like things that you would expect would monumentally and permanently change your set point of happiness. It's like
Mhm.
after a year, everyone gets back to their regular happiness set point.
Huh.
So sorry, I just went off and like that
Yeah.
isn't even related to like unpredictability. But I think that for whatever that's worth, again, that's kind of comes back to this idea that there's all these things that we would think would be so hard, and then what's actually hard is different, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and and I think especially if you've defined yourself as a helper, that's another trend I see in the groups and people like you and me. I'm the same. I went to OT school to help people, that
Mhm.
have more severe disabilities,
Mhm.
and I didn't, I don't, I find it more comfortable for me psychologically to be the helper rather than being helped. Are you the same?
Mhm. Oh yeah. I mean, and I just think about like my friends have been very thoughtful about can I carry that for you or can you reach that or
Mm-hmm.
even my mom I was helping her with something and I had mentioned I was having this brain fog and forgetting things a lot. And so the next day when I was working on this task, she sent me all these text messages with instructions and I was like, why is she sending me all these instructions? Like I know what to do. And I found it a little annoying at the time. But
Mm.
later, she had said, I just wanted to send. That was so lovely. That was
Oh wait,
so.
can you repeat that last sentence because you froze for just a second?
Oh,
Sorry.
yes. So she had sent me all these text messages, which I found a little irritating because I felt I knew the task. I knew what I was supposed to do. And later I was talking to her and she said, I sent you the instructions written down because you mentioned you were having trouble remembering things and having brain fog. And I was like, oh, that was so nice. Like that was just very, very sweet. And um, but it is hard for me to be on the receiving end of that kind of help. That's not kind of I haven't really been in that place before.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
and
very humbling.
it is. And I don't know if, you know, uh, I mean, maybe it's just one of those things that's going to take time, but I think even a year into this, you know, like my Remicade is starting to work now,
Mm.
and I'm seeing some nice impacts from that. And so I'm like, I don't think this logically, but I feel myself slipping into this like I'm cured, so I'm going to resume all my
Mm.
activities the way that I used to, and that's, you know, obviously not the case. And I'm
Right.
catching myself with that more, but I think that to me feels a lot like this sort of internalized ableism bit of like I'm 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 not I am able. I'm well. This is like a temporary thing. And you
Hmm.
know, it kind of sneaks in there, I feel like.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of two different buckets. There's one in thinking that on the one hand, anyone who's experienced a health condition, it's like you would, if I'm given the door number one, door number two, door number one is like my medications work and I have less symptoms, and door number two is like my medications don't work and I have more symptoms. Like I'm going to take door number one. Like it's just
Hmm.
a more physically and mentally comfortable existence, right? But so there's
Yeah.
like, if there's nothing wrong or ableist about preferring not to have pain.
Mm.
I believe, that's a very
Hmm.
human thing, right? On the
Yeah, that
other
makes
hand,
sense.
there's assuming or pressuring yourself to have that hero's journey and cure it or get rid of it, and assuming, operating under that assumption that the only way to have a good full life is by it going away and that the disability is the problem,
Hmm.
in all ways. And I think that's the more ableist way, in my opinion. And again, this is,
I
yeah.
I love that you clarified that because I think that that's exactly how I feel. And if you asked me to apply that to anybody else, I would say, well, no, of course not.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
no. But the experience of living it has been,
Yeah.
I'm learning a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. You're like, thank you for these lessons. Like, so
Mhm.
glad. Yeah, there's my friend Paul likes to quote this like old Japanese curse called like it just says like may you lead an interesting life. They consider it like a curse, you know what I mean? Like this is the price
Mhm.
I pay for an interesting life.
Mhm.
Well, and just being mindful of time, I want to ask you a little bit more about service dog training or just dog training,
Sure.
and then go to the rapid fire questions. And I know we've had
Okay.
Lauren on the podcast before who actually helps arthritis life behind,
Yes, I
and
listened to that one.
oh, good. Yeah, she does
Mhm.
from dog training. Her episodes from dog training to occupational therapy, Lauren's ankylosing spondylitis journey.
Mhm.
So she talked a little bit about that. But is there anything that, I get asked about, tips for dog ownership when you have a chronic pain
Mhm.
condition? Is there anything you want to share in terms of the tips, or also just in general, like your experience with the power. I've had my first dog. He's 5 now, and it's been amazing. So I'm also just like, we can just talk about dogs too, because that's fun.
Mhm. Oh, I could all day. I would be
Yeah.
more than happy. Also, he's a Cavalier King Charles.
Yes,
That's like
sweetest
one of
thing.
my dream breeds. They're so lovely.
If only Massachusetts was closer to Seattle.
I know. I know. Got to meet him someday.
He's so sweet. Okay. But yes, your experience.
Um, the as far as like living with a dog and having arthritis, I think I'm sort of picking up things as I go, and that podcast has actually gave me some good ideas. I think a hands-free leash has been a game changer for me. There's so many different kinds out there, but I'm out walking a lot. Um, so that's been a big part of it. I think I've been a lot more thoughtful about my positioning because I do a lot of training. Like I interact with my dog a lot and I interact with other people's dogs. So I've been thinking about like, um, how long am I standing? Can I sit? Are there different positions that I can be in that will be a little bit more comfortable for me? I am now that it's winter again, I am thinking about like gloves and hand warmers and ways that I deliver treats. Listeners won't be able to see this, but I often will deliver treats in a pinched between like my pointer and my thumb. And now I do a lot more in my palm because I have
I
more
do
pain in my
too.
hands than in
Yeah,
my
yeah.
wrists. So it's easier for me to do that. So those have been sort of little things that I've picked up along the way. Um, as far as sort of like the service dog stuff, I think this organization that I've been working with is Atlas Assistance Dogs. And one of the things that I love, love, love about them is they are accessing a service dog for someone who needs it can be really challenging. There are a lot of like strict medical criteria sometimes. The wait lists are very, very long. And so they are trying to make service dogs more accessible by helping people who have an appropriate dog to train that dog and at a really low cost. I think there's definitely there's a lot of people out there who want to be able to bring their dogs everywhere and who would benefit from a service dog, but maybe their dog isn't the right fit. So they do a really nice job of balancing, trying to help anybody who would benefit from having a service dog to train their dog to do that, as long as their dog is appropriate for it. And I think that is something that I have not seen a lot of in the service dog space. And so I just love seeing an organization that's really living their values. And I am a certified facilitator, so I can work with their teams to help. But I am going through a service dog training certification so that I could more formally help people train service dogs. So that's something kind of up and coming. I'm really excited about it. I think it's been really humbling. It's been really an honor to get to work with all of these incredible people and their incredible dogs. And so it's been a big joy for me and not an area when I started out that I thought I'd have such a connection with, but something that feels really
Yeah.
meaningful now, more so.
That's really wonderful. I always assumed that you'd have to train a service animal from when they're a puppy. I didn't think about the possibility of taking a family pet and then training them. It makes a lot of sense. Like you mentioned, more
Mhm.
efficient, cost effective.
Mhm.
And I love that. So that sounds amazing. I'll definitely put a link to them in the show notes. Well, this
Yeah,
has been
they're
so great.
fantastic.
Yeah, we could talk for hours.
Mhm.
But one of the rapid fire questions I love to ask is what are your best words of wisdom or advice for newly diagnosed patients, which is a position you were in less than a year ago. So,
I know.
yeah.
I think um, I would say finding support wherever it is probably been the most impactful for me, and whatever that looks like for you. I mean, for me, I need information, and I care a lot about science and having evidence base. But there's so much to be said for just someone who gets it and who um, can really help support you. I think that's probably been the most impactful thing. And I guess, you know, for me personally, what the wisdom I would say to myself if I could go back in time is like just keep at it. Which is maybe not the right advice for everybody, but for me, it was really helpful to like it was hard to make that third rheumatology appointment, being so disappointed with the providers I had seen before, but that was the one that got me kind of where I needed to be. So I think sometimes I've had to stop and rest, but kind of the persistence has been helpful for me.
That's so helpful. I'm very impatient, so I find it hard to do that sometimes. I'm like, oh, well, or I'm like weirdly optimistic. Where I'm like, it'll probably work out with this one. Where if I like then flash forward 2, 3 years down the line, you had to change anyway because it really wasn't a good
Hmm.
fit. So,
Yeah.
you're actually better off spending the time up front finding a good fit
Hmm.
with the provider. Do you have a favorite like mantra, using that term very loosely, or like inspirational saying for tough days?
Um, I don't know that I have a specific mantra. I think it's more like a cycle of things that I try to remind myself.
Mhm.
I mean, I feel like I'm constantly just like acceptance, acceptance,
Yeah.
acceptance, like it's just these like little one word things that I'm like, okay, like slow
Hmm.
down. For example, I felt pretty good this weekend. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I can start hiking with Kirby, my dog, in the mornings again.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've kind of given that up. We walk now in the afternoons. And I was like, I think I'm ready for this. And then I spent one day out in the cold and was on the couch for the whole rest of the day. And I was like, okay, acceptance. Like this is
Yeah.
fine. It's not the way I want it to be. So, I think less than a mantra, just more this like little reminders have been
Yeah, I
helpful.
like that, like a concept. I remember one year I listened to a podcast. I have no idea, I have no concept of time with COVID, but it was like instead of making a resolution, like think of a word for the year, like think of a
Hmm.
word you want to come back to. And like mine was like presence, and I'm still working on that. Or like flow, like being able to go with the flow and like, and acceptance is
Hmm.
obviously a big one, for me too. So I love that. You already mentioned the hands-free leash, but do you have another favorite arthritis gadget or tool in your toolbox?
Um, let's see. Right now, I think my I Mm, my most favorite little thing right now is my zip hoodie. I have this hoodie
Mm,
that it has a zipper along both of the arms. So on infusion day, you don't have to be freezing cold and they can still access
yes.
your veins. So that has been a good one, but I will say that this has been another plug for the group. I feel like anytime I'm like, oh, I need something for this, I've been able to go and search my emails because you always put the links in there for
Oh
things
yeah.
people talk about or recommend, and I always find something. Like that's how I found my compression gloves. That's how I found my
Nice.
ice packs. I have a nice little amassed set of gadgets now because of that. But I think my favorite at the moment is my hoodie.
I love it. And yeah, that you were the first person to introduce me to those
Oh,
infusion friendly hoodies. So yeah, I hadn't heard of those
mhm.
before. So that's awesome. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you
The
for sharing.
algorithm brought it to
There's
me.
it is scary. The algorithm's so scary right now.
Mhm.
Do you have a favorite book or movie or show you've watched recently?
Yes. Yes to all three of those, actually, if I
Yeah.
can. I won't take too
Yes.
much time. Movie is Marcel the Shell with Shoes on.
Oh my gosh.
Um,
So good.
I watch it once a month. I just like I feel like that's my mantra. That movie just it's
Yeah.
heartwarming and just like a little hug. I really love it.
Hmm.
Um, Show, I've been watching Heartstoppers on Netflix, which
Oh,
is
nice.
also like a warm hug. That's been very, very fun. And then the book, this fall, summer, I was introduced to this is a fantasy or romantasy series. The first book is The Fourth Wing, and it's
Yeah.
a
Oh, that
period
was
series.
intense.
Yes, I feel like that book just it met me at the right moment. It has a character
Mhm.
that has a chronic illness,
Yeah.
disability, and it was just like lovely escape with like it checked off all the boxes for me,
Hmm.
in terms of kind of where I was, and I haven't had a book that I've devoured in that way in quite a while. So those
That
would
was a
be
page turner. That was where I couldn't sleep because I was like, I have to know what happens. And I was like, no, the sleep
yes.
is important. And I was like, but no, what happens is important. Yeah, I love
Hmm.
that book. Awesome.
Definitely.
Thank you for sharing. And then last one. What does it mean to you to live a good life and thrive with rheumatic disease?
I feel like this has been the hardest question because I'm still figuring it out. I recognize that I am still clinging to the way that I set up my adult life before RA. And, things like morning routines and what I do with my friends and, where I travel. Um, and I've had to make a lot of adjustments to those things in the last year. And so I think that the answer to that question is like somewhere in the midst of that. It's figuring out how maybe I just don't know the answer, but I'm trying. I'm trying to figure out like how how can my life still be meaningful? Can I be living consistently with my values? And if I have to give things up, like what fills those spaces for me? I think
I love that. Yeah.
that's kind of where I am with it. I know it's not kind of a rambly answer, but
No,
That's what
not
I've
at all. I mean,
landed on.
I relate really hard to this. I actually had this quote. I'm going to read your quote if this is okay.
Mhm.
This is a quote I had up in my room in high school. I don't even know what I was relating it to back then, but I feel like it
Mm.
relates so well to chronic illness. It's a quote from, I don't know who this person is, Rainier Maria Rilke, from Letters to a Young Poet. It says, "Have patience with everything that remains unres oh, sorry. Have patience with everything that remains unsolved in your heart. Try to love the questions themselves like locked rooms and like books written in a foreign language. Do not now look for the answers. They cannot be given to you now because you could not live them. It is a question of experiencing everything. At present, you need to live the question. Perhaps you will gradually, without even noticing it, find yourself experiencing the answer on some distant day." So,
Oh, I
yeah,
love that.
I think
That is really perfect.
yeah, I say that a lot to myself, like try to love the questions themselves. Like,
Hmm.
and also there's that quote, at sunrise, everything is luminous but not clear.
Mm.
That's like Norman MacLean. At sunrise, everything is luminous but not clear. And then it's kind of about it's about the next part is kind of social, which doesn't as much for me about arthritis. But at sunrise, everything is luminous but not clear. It is those we live with and love and should know who elude us. You can love completely without complete understanding. I guess that's from A River
Mm.
Runs Through It. But that one I kind of repeat just the first and last sentence. Like, at sunrise, everything is luminous but not clear. You can love completely without complete understanding. Because it's like, I don't understand
Yeah.
what's happening in my body right now, but can I
Yeah.
still love it, you know?
Yes, that feels like that's the answer,
Yeah.
you know?
Yes. I can kind of hear my therapist kind of saying in my head, saying something like, that understand that is going to be a part of you and that wants things to be predictable and wants things to be the way they were, and
Hmm.
that's understandable, but also that living a good life is being able to be flexible and adapt to the present moment. And
Hmm.
again, you might, maybe within another month, like Remicade will put you into a full remission, and then you'll have a period where you're living, quote unquote, your old life, and that's totally, great too.
Hmm.
And but like I think nothing's permanent, so learning to go with those ebbs and flows is huge.
Yeah. That's I feel like that's been the whole thing,
Well,
you
that's
know.
the And I definitely think that chronic illness has made me a less rigid person. Like, no one who met me in a social context would consider me rigid, but I am rigid, or I tend to be rigid in terms of like, this is the plan. I make the plan. I stay with the plan.
Mm.
Like, and I don't
I
deviate from the plan. And chronic
I
illness is,
am
yeah,
oh, I was just gonna say I am learning that that is true of myself as well.
yeah. And it's like, that's a lot of highly capable people are like that.
Mm.
They they're productive. They do stuff. They get stuff done.
Hmm.
But also that way of life is not sustainable, even for able-bodied people, but certainly not for people with, disabled people or people with disabilities. You cannot
Hmm.
predict and plan everything. You just can't. So you have to
Yeah.
learn how to go with the flow. And um, yeah, it humbles you, as I said earlier. So,
Hmm.
last question, really, actual last question. Where can people find you online? This is not a deep question.
Oh, yes, this is an easy one. I'm on Instagram at shphelan, Phelan. Um, and that's probably the best way to find me. But also for my dog training, it's the Dog Behavior Institute. And so
Yes.
thedogbehaviorinstitute.com. And certainly we have a page on our website about Atlas Assistance dogs too. So I
Mhm.
can send you that if you want.
Yeah, and I also you sent me a link to a really great blog post you wrote.
Oh,
Why
yes.
Disability Pride Month hits differently this year.
Hmm.
I'm
Yes.
Yeah,
I
that's
wrote a little bit about that, the experience of going through their program after just having been diagnosed.
yeah.
So,
It's a really
yeah.
powerful article. So I definitely recommend people check that out. And it relates a little bit to our conversation about, disability, identity, ableism, and stuff like that. So thank you so much for
Yeah.
your time. I know we covered a lot of ground, and I just
Yeah.
am always very grateful to people, or for people taking the time to share what's often a very emotional journey, and sharing your vulnerability and your insights. It really helps others feel less alone, including me. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I have gained a lot from hearing other people's stories. And so if I can add a little bit to that, I'm so happy to be able to do it.
Yes. Now you're part of the Arthritis Life canon, as they say.
I accept.
Awesome. Yay! Okay, thanks so much, and we'll catch up with you later. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Arthritis Life podcast. This episode is brought to you by Room to Thrive, an educational program I created from scratch to help you go from overwhelmed to confident, supported, and connected in a matter of weeks. You can go through the pre-recorded course on your own, or you can take the course along with a support group. Learn more at the link in my show notes, or you can always go to www.myarthritislife.net. And if you like this podcast, I would be so honored if you took the time to rate and review it. I also encourage you to share it with anyone you know who might benefit from it. I also wanted to remind you that you can find full transcripts, videos, and detailed show notes with hyperlinks for each episode on my website, www.myarthritislife.net. If you have any ideas for future episodes, or if you want to share your story or wisdom on the podcast, just shoot me an email at info@myarthritislife.net. I can't wait to hear from you.